Hi, my name is Professor Martin Bunch, and this video is to present some broad principles and frameworks related to project management from my field, which is environmental studies and in particular environmental management. I'm going to give a quick overview, and I mean a very quick one, of some some ideas related to adaptive management, to ecosystem management, and to what is called the ecosystem approach. I have um, a larger number of slides that I can speak to in detail, but I am going to keep the slides in there and move through them fairly quickly. And then you can go back to those slides as a resource if you would like to review this material in more detail later. So the first thing I want to do is to point out to you that in my field, I deal with what are considered to be social ecological systems or coupled human and natural systems. And these are complex systems that are related to each other through a series of feedback loops and other relationships that cause them to be, in some cases, very resilient and resistant to change, and in other cases, very susceptible to change, maybe even passing through tipping points and going through reorganizations. You can think of the use of the word tipping points to refer to some commonly understood problems in the world like climate change. So adaptive management is an approach to deal with uncertainty that is inherent in environmental change. What it does is it tries to use the knowledge, the things that we know about the systems that we're trying to work with as a starting point, but then to design interventions in those situations as if they were hypotheses. So the idea is that we've got to make an intervention, we've got to manage these systems, and we know that we don't know some things, potentially a lot about those systems. And so when we do those interventions, we set it up as experiments so that we can monitor them and learn from the reaction of the systems that we intervene. And we do this in an iterative process where we continue through time to develop better and better understanding of the situation and the systems that we're working with. Adaptive management, which started out as adaptive environmental assessment and management, has in its sort of pure older form been characterized by a series of stakeholder workshops to mobilize local knowledge and expert knowledge together and to build simulation models so that when we intervene in the system, we first do it in a simulated world to understand a little bit about how we think the system will respond when we represent it in the way that we currently know. And then we improve both the models and our overall understanding of the system as we progress through the project management. Uh, basic characteristics of adaptive management is that they adopt this idea of working with ecosystems, which is a systems perspective. Now, systems are interrelated elements acting together as whole things. I mentioned social ecological systems, where this is a very complex sort of understanding of what systems are. Um, I'm not going to go into what systems thinking is or complexity or complex systems are, but it's something that if you want to take these kinds of approaches to problem solving and problem management, you'll need to learn about. I've already mentioned uncertainty, so we need to be prepared and have a way to intervene in situations where we don't have complete knowledge of the systems in which we intervene. This involves people. We need to identify appropriate stakeholders, engage with appropriate stakeholders, empower participants and stakeholders, and to um, intentionally engage not only scientific knowledge and expert knowledge, but also local knowledge, traditional knowledge, indigenous knowledge systems, and so on. And adaptive management also focuses on sustainable development. A little bit more about the ecosystem concept, because adaptive management is in part based on the ecosystem concept, and I'm going to talk about ecosystem management next, followed by the ecosystem approach. The term ecosystem has been around for a while. It was first coined by Arthur Tansley, a British ecologist. Well, he first coined, but he was the first to publish using that phrase. Apparently his colleague Roy Clapman was the first to actually use that term. And the ecosystem in this case refers to a set of interacting physical and biological components acting together as a whole in their environmental context. These days you'll hear people use the word ecosystem to refer to lots of different things outside of the natural environment, you know, the media ecosystem, the political ecosystem, the university ecosystem. What they're meaning is the system, not necessarily eco part of that, but they're just using ecosystem as another word for system. Themes in ecosystem management, and I'm going to run through these quickly. Again, systems thinking, hierarchical contexts. So systems have subsystems, which themselves have subsystems, and all of that is contained within wider systems or the environment. Ecological boundaries. So we need a way to understand where the system is bounded, both in time and in space. So this is kind of a scoping thing. You need to decide where the boundaries around the problem is that you're going to be working with. And this is not just natural systems, where things like watersheds are really appropriate and useful constructs. But if you're dealing with things that have human systems, you still need to identify where the boundaries around your problem are. And this is a very important process in problem solving and project management. Ecological integrity. This basically means understanding what are and maintaining the important processes in the ecosystem. So viable populations and things like that. Data collection is an important part of ecosystem management in general, both in terms of transforming data into information and then knowledge through things like knowledge sharing and communication. And filling in knowledge gaps, and refer back to what I've been saying about adaptive management to understand where that comes in. Adaptive management, I've already covered. This is a strong theme in ecosystem management in general, intentionally operating learning cycles in order to improve our understanding. Monitoring, so being prepared, like specifically prepared to learn from what's happening in the system when we intervene in it. Again, that goes back to adaptive management, but it's a general theme in ecosystem management overall. Interagency cooperation, and that goes beyond just agencies like government agencies, like different departments that might be involved in having some kind of jurisdiction over a problem, but also other stakeholders, civil society organization, First Nations, other groups like that, and also looking towards power sharing in arrangements such as co-management kind of situations. And recognizing that values are part of what we're doing. We need to understand that human values are important in these situations, and different stakeholders and different participants will have a different perspective on the situation and a different needs out of management of that situation. And we need to empower those and recognize those. And part of that is a transdisciplinary approach which puts scientific and also traditional and indigenous knowledges on equal footing to respect that these are both ways of knowing about things. Organizational change, things like changes to structure and processes in management agencies themselves are sometimes required, and fundamentally a recognition that humans are embedded within ecosystems, within nature. These are all themes in ecosystem management. Now, these themes are brought together in what are known as ecosystem approaches. Ecosystem approaches can be adaptive ecosystem approaches, and they can be applied to ecosystem management. They can also be applied to coupled human and natural systems, and even to systems and situations that seem to be more human than natural. For example, I've done work applying the ecosystem approach to urban environmental management, right? So there's mostly dominated by humans and human processes, but there are physical characteristics in urban places as well, polluted rivers, for example. The ecosystem approach is a strategy or a framework for managing some of these kinds of things. And it recognizes, again, that humans are connected to their physical environment, they're embedded within it, and that ecosystems and the natural environment produces the things that we actually need to survive. These are not just externalities, but we are embedded within and dependent upon our physical world. Now, this is a schematic, a construct from work that James Kay and as well as Boyle and Francis, his collaborators, published in the journal Futures in 1999. And it is a framework that's based upon an understanding of complexity and coupled human and natural systems. And the idea here is that this provides a guide about how to do and what to do in intervening in these very difficult, complex, and uncertain situations. That said, this is not prescriptive in terms of the actual tools and techniques and methods you might use, but it gives you kind of a process framework, and then whatever happens to be appropriate, or things that you know how to do that might also be appropriate, you can draw upon in order to intervene in a complex environmental problematic situation. Now, the top part here, the part with the yellow box, that's a system study. That's an exploration to try and figure out what's going on in that situation, and to mobilize the knowledge of people involved in that situation, to share that understanding, to incorporate scientific knowledge about things, as well as to explore the human and cultural dimensions of it. What are the groups involved? What are their perspectives? What are their values? What are their motivations? What is the political environment? What's the economic environment, as well as the physical environment that they're interconnected with? And to do this, we draw upon science and complex systems understandings, as well as mobilizing stakeholders and participants to understand their vision of the future in this context, based on where they're coming from, their culture and values. Now, this process of doing this generates a couple of things. It generates the ecological possibilities in both the human and ecological, like biophysical dimensions, and it allows us an understanding of the vision of those involved and affected, and preferences of those involved and affected in the area. And this will allow us to generate a set of scenarios of what is culturally feasible and desirable in that situation, one of which you can choose, and that is your plan. You develop a plan around that particular vision to implement. Then you go ahead and begin a program which does implement that vision, which can be mobilized using a number of different methodologies. And you operate that as a learning cycle. So the thing is subsumed in a process of adaptive management, in which interventions are made, which helps us to both empower our stakeholders and learn more about the situation as you go along. And the whole process on all sides is informed by systems approaches and understanding of complexity and systems thinking, and by collaborative processes which engage with the relevant stakeholders. They could be government departments and agencies, they could be civil society, they could be First Nations, they could be all kinds of different people, depending on what the problem is and who the stakeholders are. A different expression of an ecosystem approach is something that was developed by David Waltner Taves and his colleagues, called an adaptive methodology for ecosystem sustainability and health. And this one is more oriented towards participatory processes. That brings that part of it to the fore. In which case, what you've got is a situation that you identify or somebody identifies as problematic. You take a system study, and that's the analysis box in the top right here, in which you engage stakeholders to understand the human context, ecological context, and the policy governance context. And that is facilitated once you have a basic understanding of that, of people mobilizing their vision and preferences and knowledge systems by telling stories. The systems descriptions and narrative part of this is both analytic and synthetic. So you can do qualitative analysis using diagrammatic approaches such as rich pictures or systems diagrams. And you can have quantitative approaches like simulation models, like in adaptive management, or geographic information systems, or even mathematical models. And then synthesis using things like narratives and stories, and talking about trade-offs between one solution and another, exploring opportunities and constraints, building scenarios, etc. And then looking at learning in action, you seek solutions by facilitating conversation with multiple stakeholders and using that to design an approach to implement their collective vision that arises from that. And then monitoring and evaluating the situation, asking questions like what, who, are things getting better? If not, why not? And that feeds back into an iteration of this. So a common theme here is iterative cycles. And I'll leave it at that. And please feel free to come by my office hours, which this year are Tuesday afternoons, 2:30 to 4:30, if you want to learn any more about this. And have a good evening.